The metal chair creaked under Commander Vextal's weight as he settled into the dimly lit corner of the cantina. His three eyes scanned the room nervously before focusing on the small recording device sitting between them. The usual crowd of traders and smugglers filled the space with their chatter, but nobody paid attention to the scarred alien in the back booth. "So you really want to hear about the humans?" Vextal's voice came out rough through his translator. The device sparked and hissed, clearly old and worn from years of use. "Most folks in the Coalition, they don't like talking about that war. They pretend it never happened." The war correspondent across from him nodded eagerly. "But you were actually there. You fought against them directly." A sound that might have been laughter escaped from Vextal's throat, but there was no humor in it. His mandibles clicked together in what looked like a nervous habit. "Fought them? Kid, nobody fights humans. You just try to survive them and hope. You're lucky enough to walk away." He raised his left arm, showing deep gouges that ran from his wrist to his elbow. The scars were old but still looked painful, cutting through his natural armor plating like someone had taken a plasma torch to metal. "See these marks? They're not from our weapons or theirs. A human soldier named Tai Jun did this to me with nothing but a broken piece of scrap metal." Vextal's eyes grew distant as he remembered. "We had him cornered on some backwater planet called Kepler-7. He'd been fighting for 18 straight hours with a hole punched through his lung. Should have been dead 3 times over." The correspondent leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. "What happened?" "That's the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes." Vextal picked up his glass with a shaking hand. The amber liquid inside sloshed around as he spoke. "Right before he came at us, Taijun looked me right in the eyes and said he was sorry, apologized for what he was about to do to us." The cantina's background noise seemed to fade as Vextal continued his story. Other patrons were starting to glance their way, picking up on the tension in his voice. "That's when I knew we weren't fighting soldiers like us. We weren't even fighting an army in any way we understood. We were fighting something completely different." He took a long drink before setting the glass down with careful precision. "Humans don't fight because they love violence. They fight because they can't stand to see others get hurt." The recording device hummed quietly between them, capturing every word. Outside the cantina's windows, ships continued their endless dance of arrival and departure at Nexus Station. But inside their little corner booth, time seemed frozen as an old warrior prepared to share the secrets that had haunted him for years. "You, sure you want to hear all this?" Vextal asked one more time. "Because once I start telling you about what humans can do, you'll never look at warfare the same way again." Vextal stared into his drink for a long moment before speaking again. The amber liquid reflected the cantina's flickering lights as he gathered his thoughts. "The Proxima incident," he said quietly. "That's what our command called it afterward. Made it sound like some minor accident, you know, like equipment malfunction or a navigation error." He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't minor. It changed everything we thought we knew about warfare." The correspondent waited patiently as Vextal took another sip from his glass. 5 coalition battleships against 1 human research station. Should have been over in minutes. His 3 eyes focused on something far beyond the cantina walls. "Our intelligence said maybe 50 humans on board, all scientists and engineers. No military presence, no weapon systems, nothing that could threaten a single fighter craft, let alone 5 capital ships." "What went wrong?" the correspondent asked. "Everything went right, actually. That was the problem." Vextal's mandibles clicked nervously. "We followed standard first contact protocols perfectly, approached slowly, broadcast our intentions, demanded peaceful surrender." The station commander responded immediately. He paused, seeming to wrestle with the memory. "Her name was So-Min, tiny human female, couldn't have weighed more than one of my arms. When her face appeared on our view screen, she looked so young, so fragile. Our captain actually felt bad about the whole situation." The recording device continued its quiet humming as Vextal's voice grew more strained. So-Min listened to our demands politely, nodded along like she understood completely. Then she asked for one small favor. Just 12 minutes to evacuate the non-combatants to the emergency pods. 12 minutes, and your captain agreed. Of course he did. We're not monsters, despite what some species think about the Coalition. Standard protocol says you give civilians Time to evacuate. Shows good faith, prevents unnecessary casualties. Vextal's laugh was bitter and hollow. Those 12 minutes cost us everything. The cantina around them had grown quieter, as if other patrons were unconsciously drawn to the intensity of his story. What we didn't understand was that humans don't think like us. When Somin asked for 12 minutes, she wasn't planning to evacuate anyone. She was buying time to turn their research station into the deadliest weapon any of us had ever seen. Vextal's scarred hands trembled slightly. As he continued, particle accelerators became directed energy cannons that could punch through our shields like tissue paper. Atmospheric processors created localized storm systems that scrambled our sensors. Even their food gardens got turned into chemical weapon factories. It was like watching scientists become warriors in real time. He finished his drink in one gulp before continuing. But Somin herself, she climbed into a mining shuttle loaded with 3 reactor cores. Just her, alone in that tiny ship, flying straight at our flagship's hangar bay. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. She transmitted one message before impact. Just 7 words. Tell your people we didn't want this. The silence stretched between them as the weight of the story settled in. We lost 3 battleships to a research station. The survivors spent months in therapy, trying to process what they'd witnessed. That's when the Coalition realized we weren't dealing with just another spacefaring species. We were facing something entirely new. Vextal signaled the bartender for another drink before continuing. His 3 eyes seemed to lose focus as he drifted back into painful memories. 3 months, he said, his voice barely audible above the cantina's background noise. We spent 3 months trying to take one human farming colony. 3 whole months. The correspondent leaned closer, sensing this story would be different from the others. Command sent 10,000 troops, elite units, battle-hardened veterans, who'd conquered dozens of worlds. Against what? 200 humans growing vegetables and raising livestock on some backwater planet. Vextal's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. Should have been over in a day. He accepted his fresh drink from a passing server and took a long sip before continuing. The colony leader was this old human named Hyun-Soo, retired military engineer who'd given up fighting to become a farmer. Looked harmless enough in his dirt-stained overalls and sun hat. Our intelligence briefings described him as low-threat civilian leadership. What made him so dangerous? That's just it. He wasn't dangerous at all. He was brilliant. Vextal's voice carried a note of reluctant admiration. Hyun-Soo took a simple farming settlement and turned it into the most sophisticated defensive network anyone had ever seen. And he did it using nothing but agricultural equipment. The old commander's eyes grew distant as he recalled the nightmare of that siege. Irrigation systems became chemical weapon delivery networks. Greenhouse structures hid sniper positions so well our sensors couldn't detect them. Even the animal pens had been completely redesigned, with hidden tunnels underneath, creating supply routes we never discovered. He paused, seeming to wrestle with particularly difficult memories. But the worst part wasn't the tactical genius. It was their doctor, a human woman named Yejin. She ran the colony's medical center, took care of everyone's health needs. Simple. Country doctor, nothing threatening about her. What did she do? She saved our lives. The words came out like a confession. When our soldiers got wounded during the fighting, Yejin would treat them right alongside her own people. Same care, same attention, same medicine. I watched her work for hours to save a coalition trooper who'd been trying to kill her neighbors just that morning. Vextal's translator struggled with the emotional complexity in his voice. I asked her about it once during a temporary ceasefire. Why help the people who were trying to conquer her home? She just looked at me with these tired eyes and said, "Pain is pain regardless of who feels it," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The cantina had grown noticeably quieter around their table, other patrons unconsciously drawn to the intensity of his story. That broke something in our unit's morale. How do you fight someone who shows you more mercy than your own command structure? How do you conquer people who treat your wounded better than your own military hospitals? He finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. After 3 months, we just left, packed up our equipment, loaded our ships, and departed. No formal surrender, no peace treaty, no explanation to high command. We couldn't fight them anymore because they'd made us remember what we were supposed to be protecting in the first place. The weight of that admission hung in the air between them, like a physical presence. Vextal's scarred features reflected the cantina's dim lighting as he prepared for his next story. The weight of these memories seemed to press down on his shoulders, like a physical burden. Humans don't just fight your weapons or your soldiers, he began slowly. They fight something much deeper. They get inside your head, make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. The correspondent noticed other patrons had moved away from nearby tables, leaving their corner of the cantina eerily quiet. Titan 3 was supposed to be a simple occupation. Small moon mining colony, nothing special about it. We had 5,000 troops stationed there, full sensor networks, automated defense systems. Should have been the safest posting in the sector. Vextal's three eyes closed briefly, as if trying to block out unwanted images. Then the humans showed up. Not an invasion force, just a small resistance group led by someone called Minho. Maybe 30 fighters total. Our command laughed when intelligence reported the numbers. 30 humans against 5,000 coalition troops. It was almost insulting. He opened his eyes and stared directly at the correspondent. Within a week, half our soldiers were requesting psychiatric evaluation. Within 2 weeks, we had 3 suicides and a dozen nervous breakdowns. Minho and his people never fired a single shot. What did they do? They studied us. The words came out like an accusation. While we were analyzing their weapons and tactics, they were analyzing us. Our psychology, our fears, our family structures, everything that made us who we were. Vextal's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. They would infiltrate our bases, not to steal equipment or sabotage anything, but to leave messages. Personal messages about our lives back home, our families, our private fears that we'd never told anyone. The correspondent leaned forward, fascinated despite the growing chill in the air. Minho left a hand-drawn picture on my pillow one night, a perfect sketch of my clutch siblings from when we were younglings. I hadn't seen them in 3 years, hadn't even thought about them in months. But somehow this human knew exactly what they looked like, knew how much I missed them. The old commander's voice cracked slightly. Others found poems written in their native languages about their home worlds, love letters addressed to spouses they'd left behind, shopping lists in their own handwriting for things they'd been meaning to buy. Minho's people knew us better than we knew ourselves. The psychological impact spread through the garrison like a plague. Soldiers started refusing orders, not because they were afraid of dying, but because they were afraid of what they'd become. When you realize your enemy understands you better than your own commanders do, it changes something fundamental inside you. Vextal stared into his drink, watching the amber liquid swirl. The worst part was when we started finding care packages, food from our homeworlds, medicine for soldiers who'd been hiding injuries, even entertainment programs in our native languages. Minho's team was taking better care of us than our own supply chain. He looked up at the correspondent with haunted eyes. That's when we realized the humans weren't trying to defeat us. They were trying to save us from ourselves. They saw what the war was doing to everyone involved and decided to stop it the only way they knew how. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Vextal reached for another drink, his hands shaking more noticeably now. The cantina's ambient noise seemed to fade as he prepared to share what was clearly his most difficult memory. Mars, he said, and the single word carried the weight of 1,000 nightmares. The humans call it their second home. After what happened there, we started calling it the graveyard. The correspondent waited patiently as the old commander gathered his strength to continue. Command decided Mars would be our decisive strike. The planet housed their biggest shipbuilding facilities, massive construction yards built right into the canyon systems. Take out Mars, and we'd cripple their ability to build new vessels. Simple plan, clean execution. Vextal's three eyes stared at nothing lost in the memory. We brought everything. Orbital bombardment ships, atmospheric fighters, ground assault mechs, the works. 200,000 coalition troops ready to secure the shipyards and end the war in one decisive battle. His voice grew quieter. We had no idea what we were walking into. The correspondent leaned closer, sensing the approaching climax of the story. The chief engineer of the Valles Marineris shipyards was a human woman named Da Yun. Brilliant scientist, had designed half the construction systems herself. When our invasion began, she made a choice that still wakes me up screaming some nights. Vextal took a long drink before continuing. Instead of trying to defend the shipyards conventionally, Diane did something nobody could have predicted. She started collapsing them, deliberately destroying her own life's work to stop us from taking it. The old commander's voice grew hollow with remembered horror. But it wasn't just the shipyards. Daun had calculated the exact structural points throughout the entire canyon system. She turned Mars itself into a weapon, creating a controlled, geological cascade that buried 60% of our ground forces under millions of tons of rock. The cantina around them had grown completely silent, other patrons unconsciously drawn to the intensity of his story. The worst part was that she could have escaped. Her entire team was begging her to evacuate to the surface bunkers. The automated systems could have handled most of the sequence remotely. Vextal's translator struggled with the emotion in his voice, but someone had to stay at the primary control station to trigger the final collapse sequence manually. He stared at his reflection in the glass, seeing something the correspondent couldn't. We found her body 3 days later, when the rescue teams finally reached the control room. Da-Un was still at her station, her hand on the activation switch. She'd stayed behind to make sure the job got done right. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. The tactical brilliance was undeniable. She'd saved Mars by turning the planet itself against us. But the cost... Vextal's voice trailed off. Dayun sacrificed everything to protect her world. The humans mourned her as a hero who saved millions of lives. We mourned our complete inability to understand that level of devotion. He finished his drink in one gulp. That's when the Coalition High Command finally understood what we were really fighting. Not just soldiers or even a military force. We were fighting people who would literally move mountains to protect what they loved. The cantina's lighting seemed to dim as Vextal prepared for his next story. He rolled his shoulders, trying to work out tension that had been building for years. "You know what scared us most about humans?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "It wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was how fast they could change everything they knew about fighting, sometimes in the middle of a battle." The correspondent adjusted his recording device, making sure it caught every word. Europa Station was supposed to be our redemption. After all the failures, Command gave us one more chance to prove the Coalition could win against humans. Vextal's mandibles clicked nervously. We had them completely surrounded, cut off from all supply lines, trapped in the lower levels with nowhere to run. He paused to signal for another drink, his movements careful and deliberate. Their commander was this young human named Jae-Sung. Couldn't have been more than 25 standard years old. Our intelligence said he was fresh out of their military academy. No real combat experience. We thought it would be easy. The server brought his drink, and Vextal took a grateful sip before continuing. For the first 6 hours, everything went according to plan. Our plasma weapons were cutting through their defenses like they were made of paper. Jae-Sung's people were falling back, taking heavy casualties, running out of ammunition. Victory seemed certain. His 3 eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. Then something changed. I still don't understand how it happened so fast. One moment we were winning, the next moment everything fell apart. What did they do? They learned. The word came out like an accusation. In the middle of a firefight with people dying around them, Jae-Sung and his team somehow figured out how our plasma rifles worked. Not just how to use them, but how to improve them. Vextal's voice grew more animated as he recalled the impossible scene. Within 2 hours, they'd built hybrid weapons using our focusing crystals with their own ammunition systems. The things shouldn't have worked at all. Our engineers later said the designs violated half the known laws of physics, but somehow they functioned perfectly. The old commander's scarred hands gestured as he spoke. Jae-Sung himself killed 3 of my officers, with a weapon he'd cobbled together from spare parts and pure desperation. It fired faster than our guns, hit harder than our guns, and used ammunition he'd manufactured from materials in the station's recycling center. But the real shock was yet to come. Then their medic, a woman named Bora, started using the same improvised technology to treat wounded Coalition prisoners. She'd reverse-engineered our medical scanners and combined them with human surgical techniques to heal injuries that should have been fatal. Vextal's translator struggled with the complexity of emotions in his voice. They weren't just adapting to kill us more efficiently, they were adapting to save us too. Bo-Ra worked for 16 straight hours, treating Coalition wounded, using technology she'd invented that morning. The cantina around them had grown eerily quiet, other patrons unconsciously drawn to his story. That's when we realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting evolution in real time. Humans could adapt to any situation, overcome any obstacle, not just to survive, but to protect others while they did it. The cantina had grown noticeably quieter as Vextal's stories progressed. Other patrons seemed to sense the weight of what they were overhearing, unconsciously creating a bubble of silence around their corner booth. "Titan," Vextal said, and his translator went completely silent for several long seconds. When his voice returned, it was barely above a whisper. "The Battle of Titan broke my unit completely." The correspondent noticed the old commander's hands had started trembling more violently. Whatever had happened on Titan still haunted him deeply. We were elite coalition special forces, the best of the best, soldiers who'd never known defeat. Command sent us to clean up what they called a minor resistance pocket in the methane processing facilities. His laugh was hollow and bitter. Minor resistance, that's what they called it. Vextal stared into his drink, watching the amber liquid reflect the cantina's flickering lights. The human leader was just a kid named Sungmin, barely old enough to be considered an adult by their standards. He'd lost his entire family when we bombed the orbital platforms, but somehow he kept smiling. Always smiling no matter what happened. The old commander's voice grew strained as he continued. We had them cornered in the processing complex, 30 elite soldiers against maybe 8 humans, including Sungmin. Should have been over in minutes. Instead, it turned into weeks of psychological torture. What made it so difficult? Sungmin treated us like guests who'd overstayed our welcome, not enemies trying to kill him. Vextal's mandibles clicked nervously. He'd appear on our internal communication channels, asking about our health, offering medical supplies, even sharing food rations when our supply lines got cut. The correspondent leaned forward, fascinated by the impossible scenario. During firefights, he'd call out warnings when structural supports were about to give way, making sure our soldiers didn't get crushed. When one of my men got trapped under debris, Sungmin personally helped dig him out, all while we were still shooting at each other. Vextal's 3 eyes closed as he wrestled with the memory. The worst part was how he talked to us. Never angry, never hateful, just disappointed. Like we were children who'd made bad choices and he was waiting for us to figure out how to do better. The psychological impact had been devastating. My soldiers started having nervous breakdowns, not from fear of dying, but from guilt about what we were doing. When your enemy shows you more compassion than your own command structure, it breaks something fundamental inside you. Vextal opened his eyes and stared directly at the correspondent. My second in command, a veteran of 40 campaigns, refused to continue fighting, just put down his weapon and walked away, said he couldn't shoot at someone who kept trying to save his life. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. We didn't retreat from Titan. We fled. 30 elite special forces soldiers, running away from 8 humans who'd never stopped trying to help us. His voice cracked with emotion. We weren't fleeing from combat. We were fleeing from our own consciences. The weight of that admission hung in the air like a physical presence, changing everything about how the war would be remembered. Vextal's entire demeanor shifted as he began this next part of his story. For the first time that evening, something that might have been hope flickered in his 3 eyes. Everything changed when the Void Syndicate arrived, he said, his voice carrying a different tone now. Mechanical horrors from the outer rim, consuming everything in their path. Suddenly, the war between humans and the Coalition seemed like a family argument compared to what we were all facing. The correspondent noticed other patrons had started moving closer again, drawn by the change in atmosphere. Command made the call that nobody thought they'd ever make. Coalition forces would work alongside human military units against this new threat. I got assigned to a joint task force on Proxima 7, working directly with a human commander named Hyejin. Vextal gestured to a particularly deep scar running along his torso, one the correspondent hadn't noticed before. 6 months earlier, Hyejin, and I had been trying to kill each other on Europa Station. Now we were sharing tactical briefings and coordinating attack patterns like we'd been allies for years. He shook his head in amazement. The transition was so smooth it felt unreal. The old commander took a sip of his drink, gathering his thoughts. He Jin was everything I'd learned to expect from human military leaders. Brilliant tactician, absolutely. Fearless, completely devoted to protecting her people. But working with her instead of against her showed me something I'd never understood before. What was that? She wasn't just protecting humans. She was protecting everyone. Vextel's voice carried genuine admiration now. During the siege of Processing Station Alpha, a syndicate harvester had me pinned down in a corridor. Those things are designed to strip living tissue from bone in seconds. I was as good as dead. The cantina had grown quiet again, but this time it felt different. People were listening because they wanted to hear what came next. Haijin charged directly into that harvester's cutting beams to pull me to safety. Took a hit that was meant for me, nearly lost her left arm in the process. He touched the scar on his torso. This is where her blood got on me when I carried her to the medical station. The correspondent was scribbling notes frantically, trying to capture the emotional weight of the moment. But the real revelation came during the Battle of New Geneva. Human fleet commander named Wu Jin made a decision. That still gives me chills when I think about it. Vextal's eyes grew distant as he recalled the scene. Coalition civilian transports were trying to evacuate from the planet's surface, but syndicate dreadnoughts had them trapped. Wu Jin's entire fleet, hundreds of ships, positioned themselves between the civilians and the enemy. The old commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I watched Wu Jin's flagship ram straight into a syndicate dreadnought. His last transmission wasn't some heroic battle cry or tactical update. He just said he was sorry it had taken so long for humans and coalition forces to understand each other. The weight of sacrifice hung heavy in the air between them. That's when it finally clicked for all of us. Humans had been fighting us the same way they fought the syndicate, with everything they had, because they couldn't conceive of surrender. When innocent lives needed protection, we'd mistaken their desperation to save others for aggression toward us. The cantina had nearly emptied by the time Vextal reached his final story. The few remaining patrons sat in respectful silence, as if they understood they were witnessing something historic. Today I teach at the Coalition War College, Vextal said, gesturing to the insignia on his uniform that the correspondent had barely noticed before. Every single cadet who comes through our program studies human military campaigns, not to learn how to defeat humans, but to understand what warfare actually means. The old commander's scarred features softened as he spoke about his current role. We have entire courses dedicated to the tactical brilliance of commanders like So Young, Dong Hyun, and Yunji. Their strategies are required reading for anyone who wants to understand modern combat doctrine. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But the real lesson isn't about tactics or technology. The correspondent leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of everything Vextal had been trying to explain. What we learned is that humans weren't better soldiers because they were stronger or had superior weapons. They were better because they fought for something bigger than themselves. His translator conveyed deep respect and admiration. Every human I encountered during the war was willing to die not just for victory, but for the possibility that their sacrifice might prevent others from suffering the same fate. Vextal gestured around the cantina, indicating the mix of species sharing drinks and stories. Look around this room. 5 years ago, half these species wouldn't sit at the same table, together. Now they're trading stories and sharing meals. That's the real legacy of the human approach to warfare. The correspondent glanced around, noticing for the first time the unprecedented diversity of the crowd. Human concepts of acceptable losses completely revolutionized how we think about military strategy. Before the war, we calculated success based on territory gained and enemy casualties inflicted. Humans taught us to measure victory by how many lives we saved, both our own and our opponents. Vextal's voice grew more animated as he explained the transformation. Our military academies now teach psychological warfare as a tool for ending conflicts faster, not prolonging them. We study human methods of turning enemies into allies, of showing mercy under fire, of fighting with compassion instead of hatred. The old commander stood slowly, his movements careful but dignified. "The greatest tragedy of that entire war," he said, looking directly at the correspondent, "is that we were never really enemies to begin with. Humans fought us so fiercely because they were trying to protect something precious. Their families, their ideals, their hope for a better future. We mistook their desperation to save others for aggression toward us." He walked toward the cantinas, exit, then paused and turned back. The war taught the entire galaxy that humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or their clever tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept that some things cannot be saved. His voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. They showed us that surrender isn't the absence of hope, it's the abandonment of it. As Vextal disappeared into the corridor beyond, the correspondent realized he'd just witnessed something unprecedented. A former enemy's complete transformation from conqueror to student, all because of humanity's unique understanding that true strength comes from protecting others, not destroying them. The recording device clicked off, but the story would echo through the galaxy for generations.